No, I mean, I guess if there's no updates, maybe we can wait till Thursday.
We will have meetings after this, so we don't.
Okay.
But we can have an update on Thursday.
Are you talking about group common discovery or about the main? Okay, main thing would be more interesting. That's very good.
Yeah. We're not the smart system, I think they're such these particular sessions.
We now seem to be like, okay, because so many people generate slides. Oh my gosh.
They have to listen, figure out what the hell happened in the application.
Yeah. You downloaded the slides. There is a very fresh update. Yes. Okay, so welcome to the call session. I'm Carsten Bormann. With me is Jaime Jimenez. That always happens. No, it's the Chromebook is acting up. No, doesn't want to do this today. Yes, there are two full screens and you have to press them in the right order.
Yes.
And what is the right order? No. Ah, much better. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm used to computers with keyboard, so I don't know how to press these buttons on the screen. Yeah, so this is an IETF meeting. We assume people have read the drafts, and you should be aware of the so-called IPR principles and all the other principles that apply, and these are all summarized in a note well that we no longer seem to get with our materials. I don't know how that works, but just read this slide quickly, and then you will know what applies to you. And in particular, if you know about patent claims that might apply to something you want to talk about, you can always shut up and not talk about it, or tell us about it. These are the two choices. Okay, the agenda is a little bit jumbled up at the moment because it's Monday, very early morning in Europe. And so people have not been submitting things and so on. So we'll see how we get through this. So we have reshuffled this a little bit, and Jaime will need to check that we do this in the right order. So this order is no longer the right one, and we will try to get through things. But basically, this is what we want to do today. And given that some people have canceled, we might be able to pull items forward from Thursday. On Thursday, we want to talk about a few more active drafts. We want to talk about the new congestion control draft that we didn't get to in Montreal, and we could talk about streaming and other new work if we have time for that. So the detailed agenda are on the data tracker. Any changes, any other changes we need to make to those? Okay. So this slide is empty this time, but maybe we'll find more during the week. So let's talk about the workgroup status for a moment. Our 9th RFC was published on August 31st. For me, it already was September, but it still has an August name on it. So that's nice. We had a lot of discussion about the links JSON document that had left the workgroup already 1.5 years ago, and then got lots of comments from other groups. So this group was comfortable with it, but other people weren't. And so we kind of got that back and took a long while to figure out what we wanted to do. And so for a time we thought, well, we can refocus this to be a little bit more general, don't inherit all the limitations of 6690. Now, later we will talk about Coral as another format that's coming up, and that might solve some of the same slot that this one was supposed to fill. So we have to decide, is the gap between what we have in 6690 and what we will have in Coral worth completing this, publishing this? One notable observation is that OCF already have taken much of the content of this document, but changed it and adapted it to their use. So they wouldn't be able to benefit from publishing this because their format looks different. So one question we have to decide is there a user that would benefit from finishing this, or do we wait for Coral to complete and become the document of choice for this?
Much as I'd really like not to have to actually parse text strings, I'd rather have 2 things I had to deal with than 15.
Okay, that was Jim Schad. Yeah, that's one input, and that's input that many people have put in the hallway. So there seems to be a general sentiment to say, okay, this has languished for so long, we might as well wait for Coral to complete and use that instead in this space. So the main difference is that Coral is really optimized to be used on small devices, and that Coral also can much easier carry additional information that with links JSON we still have to somehow fudge into link format style target attributes. So it's a much more flexible way of doing things, but of course flexibility always has a price. That's the reason why I'm not wholeheartedly saying let's just do this and be done with it. So we don't have to make the choice today, of course, but it would be good to get a sense of the room. And of course, my first question is, who in this room actually has read the Coral document? So it's about 10. And who is reasonably happy with it and could imagine that we go this way, replace links JSON with Coral. So I'm seeing a lot of half hands here. So a lot of hands, but some of them half. So yes, we don't know the answer to that yet. Any other question I should ask at this point? Yeah, probably I should ask, if Coral is the thing we want to go with, who would be willing to provide reviews of this document? Jim, Ari, Jaime, Matthias, so the usual suspects. Christian. Good. Okay, so we do have some support for working on this document. Okay, anything else we want to discuss on this? I would propose to take it to the list from here. So the next step for me would be to go for working group adoption, to do a working group adoption call for the Coral document, because that's the obvious next step if we want to pull this in. Zach, can you use the microphone?
Zach Shelby, that's a little indirect, like this might want to use that, thus we should accept the other as a working group document. Probably we should talk about Coral
Yes,
on its own.
we should.
Something that was a working group.
Okay. So you see some need for discussion before we issue a working group adoption call, because the discussion could happen in the working group adoption call as well. Okay, let's have some discussion before that. Good. So this stays on the back burner, and we see if we get Coral adopted, and if we do, then we seem to have a way forward. If we don't, then we also know that we have to finish this. I see some nodding here. Good. So the next document that is sitting in the ISG since last year is Coco. Here, since this is really a transport issue, so it's bridging between this working group and the transport area, Mirja volunteered to be the AD here. And we got some great feedback and generated a new version, -03. And in London, we actually found out there seems to be some potential for misunderstanding the document. And sad as it is, I have to report that we still have not resolved this. So we ran out of time in Montreal doing this. And yeah, maybe we can try again this week to find out what the problem is, so we can ship a -04 and go on from that. But I also want to remind people that Coco is not the only congestion control scheme that ever will be defined for CoAP. If you think about TCB, that there are a 3-digit number of them, and that's not a problem, because the congestion control scheme is a local matter. So you implement whatever fits your application best. And so there is next one lined up, the phaser work, and we will talk about that on Thursday. Okay, anything else we want to discuss here in this room now about this? Object security. I think we just said we will discuss it on Thursday. But just as a quick status report, this was submitted to the ISG in February. There were a lot of useful ISG comments, and these have led to the main revisions 11 and 12, and there have been 3 additional minor updates since, and there will be some discussions this week to see whether we can clear the remaining discussed by Eric Westcaller. Is that a fair? Okay. So the assumption that most people have who have looked at this in detail is we will get it fixed at some point, But as with every piece of security, it does require a very good look. So we can consider ourselves very happy that we got this detailed look from the ISG and can make sure that there aren't even editorial forms of misunderstanding things. Okay, and the fourth document that is in the ISG is too many requests.
Okay, so the too many requests, that's in ISC review. It has actually, well, no discusses. All ADs seem to be relatively happy with that, but there's a whole bunch of comments that could be clarified there, small things here and there. So this is about the 05 is the current version in the data tracker, but then there's also a 06 version, it's upcoming, that is in the GitHub, that is also pointed out on the mailing list comments. And that one is addressing all the comments that we have received so far that didn't make it to the deadline for 05. So key things, some clarifications. Number one question that got from the IESG was that why are we using max age and not defining a new option? And the reason for this is that 503 is already using max age for the purpose of telling the client to back off, come back after this time, and then we'll be done. And I guess the reason for 503 to use that initially was that it's the proxy caching rules actually map nicely. So what we did clarify in this draft that we are not defining a new use of max age. We're simply reusing whatever was defined for 503. And there was one ISC comment that maybe we should also update the IANA registry to point out that, okay, also this document is using max age to make it more clear for implementers when they see that. But it still seems to be the reasonable way forward that we are using max age. We did discuss it also earlier in the core group, whether we should have a different option for that. So far, the consensus seems to be leaning towards keeping it as max age. On server behavior, what we're clarifying is that if the client does not respect the backoff from the 429, so the client keeps on doing the same requests even though there was a max age option telling not to do so, it's now said that, okay, the server may also respond with 503, and the rationale here being that maybe the client simply doesn't recognize the 429 error code, because it's a new error code that is now being defined. The 503 gets the same behavior, but just gives the client much less information what it could do. Then currently there was a transport area review saying we may need to do some rate limiting on how often would you answer with this code. So currently the draft says you could, for example, limit to once every RTT, estimated RTT, but discussing here in Bangkok with Karsten that actually such estimates may not be well available for a server, and there could be some other criteria how you want to rate limit. So now there's a proposal that maybe instead of saying once every RTT, is saying taking into account your usual load shedding policies. So whatever you usually are using for this purpose, use also for this error code, instead of this error code having a specific way of doing that. And there's also a note that in general, when you are doing these kind of things, you are actually making per client state. So if you are doing this kind of procedures, which may be counterproductive for your original goal of reducing load. So that is now noted in the draft. And also there's finally a reminder that this code is meant for to the client that is actually causing the overload. If it's some other clients or some other reason causing overload, the 503 is more appropriate for that use. Just as a note about something that I guess we all know implicitly, but it's good to be explicit on that. On the client behavior, there was a question, how do you interpret max age? And like, what is the exact time? When should you start your timer? How long to wait? So CoAP RFC currently says about this max age that it's current at the time of transmission. So there was a offline discussion, what does that actually mean? And we realized, well, it's a bit ambiguous. Maybe a bit more clarifications for this would be useful. So Karsten started this new draft on CoAP clarifications and corrections, which could eventually then be clarifying this for all users of CoAP. Because again, this max age is not specific for this draft, so having those details in this draft is probably not the right thing to do, but having a general clarification draft for that purpose makes more sense. One thing we did clarify here is that if the max age is missing, use the default value as already defined in 7252, But just to reiterate that those rules do apply. On the security area, especially for the security area review, we added a few clarifications. Again, the first one may be a bit obvious that co-op RFC security considerations apply, but maybe that's a helpful thing to note there. And then on the trust on the response code. So again, this is nothing specific for this response code. But if you are using NoSec mode, yeah, you cannot trust the response is coming from the right agent, and that would actually mean it could be used as for DOS. So you should trust the response only to the level you are trusting your underlying security. So if you use TLS, you get TLS, get freshness and integrity, for example. But if you have NoSec, well, you should take that into account. There's a minor privacy concern on that. If you don't use encryption and you do send these replies, that could be leaking some form of information. What is the current state of the server? That, for example, the server is being now currently under heavy load. Didn't seem like a big issue, so we didn't put normative text, but we did note that in the security considerations, if that is a concern from some kind of deployment. And finally, the security considerations already earlier said that if you are under attack, instead of replying to all of those requests, just simply dropping them could be the right kind of approach. However, the downside of that is the clients are likely to retry. So again, it's a trade-off to be taken into consideration on the kind of a policy you would apply, whether you drop or reply to all of them if you consider yourself being under attack. And then final thing, so we didn't add anything on this topic to the draft, but again, because it seems to be an issue wider than just this particular draft. But we got questions on what happens when you're behind a proxy. So if there's number of clients behind a proxy, they all communicate with the same server. In the basic mode, for the server, it seems that all the clients are actually the same clients because it's the proxy, unless you use some additional piece of information. And now when the server replies with too many requests to the proxy, well, the last one actually did the request that went over the line will get that reply. And that could have been, for example, the very first request that client made. But it seems there isn't much we can do about that unless you have some extra piece of information. And again, this is a bigger issue than just for this draft. So we are recommending this to be again in the corrections and clarifications draft. That's all. So that was a recap of all the changes over the past 3 weeks, roughly.
Alexei, speaking as AD, when are you going to have a new draft, which I can approve?
I think.
Or do you think you need more work discussion on this?
I didn't see anyone reacting massively of any of these things, so I assume they're all okay, and they were all already discussed on the list. So this was just check if there's no issues. I can press the button today, tomorrow,
okay,
with along the lines of that just presented here. The one thing that has not been on the list was this new proposal: servers should rate limit 429 replies, because that came basically yesterday. So, but that seems to make a lot of sense. It's the same thing, slightly more general. Doesn't seem like a controversial thing. So I can include that in the next update.
Can you go back to the proxy slide? So Dave Thaler. So yeah, I think it's probably out of scope for this draft, but we probably need to say something somewhere.
Agree.
And when doing that, another bullet to add to that list of things to cover in the other document that's not this one, whatever that is what do you do in the case of an HTTP to CoAP proxy? You need to specify the rule there too.
Good point. I wonder what that proxy RFC currently says. Probably not enough.
Fortunately, it's out of scope for this draft. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the documents about proxies right now were written with a consideration that we would learn things about proxies as we go along. So they're not at the current moment trying to nail down everything. So maybe this is a good opportunity. But let me quickly point out the reason why this is a little bit more complicated than we like. So this is trying to be a REST environment. So the idea is that the server doesn't keep state about what clients are out there. So if the server wants to tell a particular client, you are sending too many requests, that's entirely wrong from the point of view of REST. Now, in a real-world HTTP environment, of course, you would have the TCP connection as a piece of state on which you can piggyback something like that. But we don't have that, or at least we don't always have that. And of course, once we have a proxy in there, it becomes worse because even if the origin server has the state telling the right client who's overloading them, we cannot expect the proxy to also keep state about request rates and so on, because the proxy has no idea what the server actually is able to handle and so on. So it's really hard for the proxy to send back the information that this is too much to the right client. And unless we change the architecture a lot, I don't think there's a good way to fix that. So the inverse observation is that as a nice, well-behaving client, you might go through a proxy that suddenly sends you a 429 because some other client of that proxy is sending too many requests. So that's something that the nice client has to be prepared to receive. And that, of course, complicates state machines because right now you would expect, as a client, you would expect you get a response. And now you have the possibility that you get a 429. But you always had a possibility that you got a 503. So it's not that much more of a stretch. Yeah, we will talk about the corrections clarifications document in a moment.
Hi, Ted Lemon. So I was just curious if you have any sense of how well this is actually working in practice right now.
The use of this response code?
Yeah.
Not much of it. This is actually a relatively recent thing, but it seems to be, especially the OCF guys said they're already implementing something like this. So probably worthwhile asking from them, but it seems to be, the need seems to be there, being something more, better guidance for client than 503. Because 503 pretty much was earlier, you could say like, hey, something went wrong on this side, please back off. Now you have a bit more indications, but let's say operational experience is still pretty low.
All right, thanks.
Good. So Alexei got his answer when we get a new version? Tomorrow.
I'll be excited to actually get the document.
Well, everyone published in August, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we have one other document that is post working group last call. That's the multi-part content type, which is a pretty interesting Swiss Army knife tool. And one wonders why that hasn't been defined 20 years ago, but the answer is probably there was no CBOR 20 years ago. So Thomas, where's Thomas? Thomas tried to define it 5 years ago, and we didn't have CBOR at the time. So we finally have it, so we can do it. Klaus sent a pretty nice review with a ton of editorial comments that we have to put in, and two questions that I think are worth discussing here. One is that right now that there are two ways of saying something is not present in the set of representations that make up the multipart response. One, of course, is not including anything about it at all. So if you don't want to send something, you don't put it in. That's of course obviously a solution. And the other thing you can do in this version of the draft is you can actually indicate there might have been a text plain something or an application PDF something, but this something explicitly has a value of null. So that's more flexibility for putting in the information that something is not there. So you can say it's not there by not putting it there, or you can say, yes, really, this is not there. Now, why is that a good idea? Because applications that make use of multipart might simply say, I expect a multipart structure with 2 entries or with 3 entries, and the first one is this, the second one is this, and the third one is this. Now, if the second and the third one happen to have the same media type, and you want to leave out the second and not the third, that's hard to say without this functionality. But still, the question is, how often do you need something like that? And is it worth complicating this structure by allowing a null value? And we already have taken out some other things from the structure because it was too complicated. So this is really a question that we could ask ourselves. Now, I think this measures well with the other observation here, which is that the current version of the PubSub draft is not yet using multipart CT. We essentially have defined multipart CT, among others, to solve the problem for PubSub. And the document is using this as an example. And for PubSub, it might be useful to have this null version to say there is nothing new. Yeah, we have a little problem because Michael Costa, who could be talking about the PubSub document, cannot be here because of a medical emergency, and he cannot even join remotely today. He hopes to be back on Thursday. We probably can discuss the PubSub part on Thursday. But at this point, I would just like to hear, does anybody have an opinion on this little piece of complexity?
I think that actually, I would say that you don't want that, and the right answer may at some point be to define a content type. There isn't anything here instead.
Yeah, but that's different from saying.
That's different from saying
there is no application PDF in
that's
there
different
today.
from saying there's a binary value here, and oh, by the way, the binary value is not here.
Binary in the sense of 1 or 0.
Binary in the sense of application / binary.
We call it application / object stream. But,
Okay, whatever.
Yes.
I mean,
Right.
say, if I go in and I say, okay, I've got an application / ACE plus CBOR here, and what's there is nothing, that kind of may be confusing to some people. Whereas what if I go in and say, there's no content type in this slot, that may actually be a better answer in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Alexei, I think I'm not entirely convinced this is needed, but if it's needed, I probably would agree, because the current proposal is sort of deviating from MIME, and I know you're not using MIME structure, but you are conceptually using similar thing as a collection, a tree of, body parts and stuff. So, yeah. Keep it simple for now, maybe do something like what Jim said, later.
Well, that raises another interesting question that maybe you can answer, which is, let's say a year from now, we decide we want to extend this. Do we do this within the same media type? Is it still a multipart CT after we have extended it? Or do we do a new media type?
Well, it depends on what kind of restrictions you put on the current text, right?
Yeah, right now, for instance, there is one warning in the text that says this might be extended in the future. That doesn't make a difference whether we remove that or we leave that in?
Well, if you have to extend it, is the new version going to be backward compatible?
Yes.
Can the old stuff still read and,
Yes.
well, then what I'm saying, if you sort of have extensibility right, then you probably don't need to change. If you change the structure, if you decide that you need extra fields which weren't there, well, then it has to be a new MIME type because old stuff couldn't parse it.
Right. So you need a new MIME type for text HTML5 because there's stuff in there that text HTML couldn't parse.
It's not quite the same because it's sort of, let's not go there. That's not a good example, probably.
Yeah, what is a good example? I mean, do we have a canonical example for media type evolution that we can point to and say, we want to behave like these people?
The problem is, for me, you're asking a question which is too general.
Yes.
And it's hard for me to give you a very general, I cannot tell you whether, yes, it's all going to be fine or no, it's, I think I need to see examples of what kind of extensions you're thinking about.
Okay, so let's take exactly this one as an extension, as an example. So let's assume right now the text says that there's always a binary string there that is the representation of the part. And then we want to extend it to also allow a null value in this place.
That's not backward compatible now.
Well, it's not forward compatible. It is backward compatible. But yes, whatever you call it. Yes. So then you would say...
If you say in the current document saying this value, that should be binary value, it can be null value, which is reserved for future use, that would be compatible in the future. At least this way you're alerted that it might be null in the future. That would have been okay.
Okay. So the next question that we probably will take to the list is, do we want to say that or not? But that would be something like a middle position between including it or excluding it. Thank you.
But, by the time you have the discussion, maybe you already decide that you want it or you don't want it. So, it might be just a bit easier.
Hi, Padma Kumar from Nokia. So this question, at least for me, I'm trying to evaluate whether this means like every time it repeats, this null value could occur, like multiple times that CT is coming up, or is that like a one-time thing? Because depending on that, for example, like if you are going to send CBOR, TLV, etc. together, each of it, if it has a null value represented by itself, then that could occur in the compacted multiple content type. Otherwise, I think we are trying to override that specific content type, what it does or does not represent as a null value, right?
Yeah, so the null value would be in place of a representation of the part. And of course, it wouldn't mean we have extended the media type by a null value as an additional possibility, but it would mean that thing isn't there. And if you don't have a way of saying that thing isn't there explicitly, then you cannot always use positional encoding. So an application cannot say that there are 4 potential things, 1, 2, 3, 4, and each of them can be left out. Then, of course, in an array, you have a problem that when you leave out one, you don't know which one you left out. And that was the reason why this was original in the proposal. Okay, so that doesn't entirely seem to be a slam dunk. I was hoping we could just generate a new version and be done with it, but let's find out what we want to do with this on the mailing list. Good. So what's the time? I cannot see the time. Oh, great. So we have minus 5 minutes to talk about two documents. One is the stateless document that passed working group adoption recently, and we're waiting for the author to resubmit it as a draft IETF. So this represents the result we had of the discussion how to solve the stateless problem, and SIGSTISH is waiting for us to resolve that, so we don't have all the time in the world of doing this. So of the two ways of doing this we had, this is the way with potentially a little bit more impact on the ecosystem, and it also has one open issue that we have to solve in the working group process is how do you know whether you are supposed to send a 60 kilobyte token or not? So right now we don't have any mechanism that would indicate somebody is able to accept a token that is longer than 8 bytes, and it sounds innocuous if that is 12 bytes, but it might be 60 kilobytes, and so we have to think about how to handle this case. Of course, there are other things that can be made big, so it's not a completely new problem, but since it's in a place of the message format that didn't grow much yet, it's maybe something to specifically look at. So, who has read this version of the stateless document? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. So maybe you can use this opportunity to say you really should read this document because we are actually reaching into the 7252 packet format and opening this up a little bit. If you have an implementation, you probably want to be aware of that. Okay, the other document that didn't begin working group adoption yet, but should have maybe, is the corrections and clarifications document. I think we have talked about this in a number of meetings, and now finally there is an initial draft for it. And the idea is to do the same thing that was done in RFC 4815. Now, of course, most of you won't know RFC 4815. That's another document that has corrections and clarifications in the title. And this was held as a running document, as a working document by the ROC working group for almost 5 years. And the ROC working group used this draft to document minor points of clarification and so on, plus actually needed corrections, which usually also were clarifications, but there were clarifications where really a decision had to be made before the clarification could be issued. These were collected in the document, and this was mostly based on implementer feedback. So we haven't done this in this working group, and I consider ourselves lucky that we didn't have to. So ROC is an extremely complicated standard, 170 pages. And so it does attract bugs when you build something of that complexity. And CoAP isn't as complex, but still we have a few things that we want to clarify. And for instance, the meaning of max age was raised by the ISG when discussing the too many requests. And there are some details that I think by now we probably can say more about than we could 5 years ago. If this becomes a working group document, we probably want to cook up a little bit of process how we put entries in there. And we might want to label the entries at some point as working group consensus if we think the specific clarification or correction issued in there no longer has open issues. That the whole thing, of course, saves us from doing another document each time we have one of these small issues. So, yeah, I don't know. 4815 has a large 2-digit or a small 3-digit number of issues in it, and we might not get there, but it doesn't make sense to exercise the process each time. So the next version of this document might have a draft version of that process. So if people are interested in this, I would like to hear from them offline what we might want to put in there. But I think it's pretty much clear what you want to do there. So you have a candidate issue, then you have an issue with a proposed resolution, and then at some point you have an issue with an accepted resolution. That would be 3 steps, and maybe we have to add a 4th or a 5th, and that should be about it. And of course, an accepted issue might itself have issues that have to be fixed afterwards. Okay, who has had a look at this stub document? So two people, that's not much. So maybe some more people want to look at it before we actually get the call for working group adoption issued.
I just had a very quick look at RFC 7815 and that it has sort of list of issues and old text, new text, so it's kind of patch.
Yes.
Right. From recent experience in ISG, I think it's very hard to review the documents like this. It's much easier to review actually updated document than try to apply a patch, especially if we had a document recently where there were multiple issues and sometimes they were being applied to the same section. So you had to read the most latest corrected text to actually figure out what the final text is going to be. If it's all of this is applying to a single document, just publish updated, publish BIS.
Yeah, we probably won't ever publish this.
Okay.
So
well, I'm just
4815.
If it helps the working group to deal with the issues as a running document, and then once you resolve all of them, you maybe just publish BIS based on that, I think that's fine.
So I think this is just a glorified form of a pull request.
That's okay. I think, I probably can hear several ISG members screaming if you submit a document like this to ISG to publish. But if it's just internal documents in the working group, that's fine.
So the working group just gave up at some point and said, we don't have the cycles to do the editorial work to put this together. I mean, this was before Git and so on. And RFC 3095 was written in Microsoft Word, and it was a complicated process. So that's why this just was published as a separate document. But I don't propose that we want to do this. It might turn into a nice informational document at the end if we have applied all the things that are really issues and we just have nice explanations. That might happen. But yes.
This was supposed to update only RFC 7252 or the others as well?
I think it should. We should use it as a repository for issues for all the nine RFCs we have. In particular, there already have been places where it might be useful to do something to 6690, and I'm sure Observe blockwise will have this kind of need for clarifications at some point. So if you look at the document, it actually lists some 5 RFCs it would be updating if it were published. But again, the point is not necessarily to publish it in this form. And yeah, we will have 5 years since the original publication of RFC 7252 next year. So it might be a good thing to actually start this process at some point. But let's first collect the things that we actually want to change and see how heavyweight that is. Okay. Yeah, the next item on the agenda is OSCOR. As I said, we are going to talk about the base document on Thursday after some more hallway discussions, and now we will talk about the group communication parts.
Okay, Marco Tiloca from RISE. A quick update on OSCOR for group communication. We have a major revision of the document, mostly based on 2 detailed reviews from Jim and Peter. Thanks a lot for that. Of course, all of editorial changes, mostly to improve readability and have a better alignment with the main OSCOR document. And upon many people's requests, we moved every detail on key management, key provisioning aspects out of this document and to the related document in ACE that we refer here. We keep in this document only high-level pointers and discussion on the importance of that, especially the group manager as the only responsible for key provisioning and handling key material in the group and acting as repository for public keys of group members. But again, the details are moved out to the ACE document. We have also now 2 proper separated sections for the COSI object and the other compression, again on the editorial side, while a big technical update is the counter signature. It used to be placed inside the OSCOR option. Now it has been moved out and appended to the payload of the secure message. And this has the advantage to achieve more affordable impact in terms of message fragmentation, while still it's just possible to easier parse the OSCOR option, retrieve the context, and then proceed. We added some more text on security considerations that we actually plan to extend further. So for the time being, mostly on management on group key material and possible misalignment of security contexts among group members right after new key material has been distributed in the group and how to handle that. Other aspects handle what happens if you experience wraparound of sequence numbers by group members and use as partial IVs and how to handle that. We have compressed the list of responsibilities of the group manager. Now a single one used to be 2 lists. Pointed out explicitly the need for registering the bit in the OSCOR option to signal the presence of the signature that is actually defined in this document. And we have rewrote, I would say from scratch, a massively shortened appendix D describing at a very high level the setup of a new endpoint. Because again, everything related to the provisioning of key material to a new endpoint is out of scope for this document and described in the ACE1. As the next steps, we would like to converge to an actual implementation version of this document. We believe we are pretty much there actually, because as co-authors, at least we don't see any big issue left that will stop an implementation of this spec. We would just like to better define what aspects are exactly up to application policy, like how to handle transmission of error messages back to group members if something is wrong. We would like to expand further the security considerations, hopefully as a one-to-one match with the respective subsections in the main OSCOR document. Speaking of implementation, in RISE we are going to start soon implementation for Californium, building on the current one available for SCORE. And Osram Innovation is also planned to start soon an implementation in C. I was told to be used specifically for the .dot framework. Of course, if anyone else is interested in considering this spec for implementing, you're very welcome. And that was it for the update.
So what's the next step?
Converging or maybe even agreeing on this very version to say, let's start implementing this towards Interop next year. And we are actually we have actually 2 implementations scheduled to start soon. So more are welcome.
How will this interop be organized? Do you have an idea about that?
Not yet, honestly, so in detail. But we can start remotely with something very friendly to bring something more concrete here as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think it would be good to have something like a timeline for this. Next year is nice, but next year might be December.
No.
So what's your best guess when that interop will be?
I hope we can have an actual one in the summer meeting. We'll try to have something already testable earlier.
Good.
If possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll proceed with the next one. Okay, Mark Di Loca from RISE again. This is a related work that we started after some discussion at the MIC on GroupOSCORE in Montreal, actually, where some were wondering, is there any other work, especially in this working group, that somehow uses groups and can be helpful in any way to GroupOSCORE? And we talked about the possible use of the resource directory for that, so to facilitate applications using security and based on groups. We tried to elaborate the story a little bit more and talked about a newly deployed device that eventually gets an operational identity to run its group application, but even at that point in time, that identity might still lack a number of information that are operatively required to work in a secure group. For instance, the identifier of the group, the IP addresses used in the group, multicast IP addresses, or specifically the link to a joint resource of the group manager to get access to the group, and at that point in time also get the key material to operate in the group. And this can actually happen for a number of reasons, like even a manufacturing time, and there's just not such available information to provide to the joining node, or the information that the joining node required to operate in the group has changed right before the device deployment, or extreme case, the device is deployed even before the group manager is deployed, or before the group manager has created the group the device would like to join. So we try to find a way to use essentially the core resource directory for a joining device to possibly find the existence of the OSCORE group in the first place, and to retrieve all the missing required information to join that group through the responsible group manager. And we actually use resource lookup of the resource directory, because in the end, the join device needs to retrieve the pointer and a link to the join resource of the group manager to access the group and get the key material to securely operate in the group. We try to be general, but we had as a guideline the method described in the ACE draft referred here, so of course we are consistent with that, first and foremost. It works like that pretty much, as steps ordered in time. The group manager sooner or later is supposed to register itself as an endpoint in the resource directory, and at the same time to register all its join resources with the related link attributes. And we are referring also to a new value for resource type, OSJ, to be considered for the core parameters registry. So in this example, essentially the group manager registers itself and one of its join resource with additional information. Later on, might happen that the group manager creates new OSCORE groups, or for some reason it has to update some information related to those groups, and of course it has to update the entries related to those join resources. And one way to do that is that the group manager re-registers itself. An alternative way would be somehow using fetch or patch, but that of course would require the proper definition of format for that. And then later on, the device can perform a resource lookup at the resource directory, specifying a number of search criteria, which resource type OSJ is mandatory, and other are possibly usable in addition, like the identifier of the OSCORE group, or the identifier of the group manager registered as an endpoint in the RD, and the joining node gets back as a reply all the information it needs to contact the group manager and join the group. And already in this example, I highlighted the possible, of course, optional use of observation for this request. which has a number of advantages, like, of course, automatic notification in case one of this information is updated later on, or even for the extreme case where the joining node is deployed even before the group manager is deployed or the group is created. And so only later on, when the group is created and all the related information is fully available, they can be provided to the observer response to the joining node. Of course, if you do like that, you can produce a response to observe with quite a large payload. There are so many join resources for that group manager. So it's actually recommended to use observe here in this request only if the lookup is fine-grained, meaning if you have the identifier of the group also used as the search criteria. Very next steps is, of course, getting feedback and comment on this new work, and of course align it to possible upcoming changes to the main resource directory document. That's it.
Jim Schott. I haven't read this document. I probably obviously need to. One of the things that we're talking about in terms of the resource directory is to get rid of the concept of groups. Does that kill you or not?
It's the same for this document at this point in time. In fact, we use only resource lookup.
Okay.
And we don't care about what happens to the groups in the RD as they are now.
Okay.
From the perspective of this document.
Peter van der Stok, to react to that. If we remain with the old groups as specified in the resource directory, it will work as well. And we have done and going forward to the next one, which is more appropriate because it uses resources. And so that will work better. It will be much more. But of course, we have to say that we must have more experience in how we install things to see if it's actually the right approach. Okay.
Hi, Padma Kumar from Nokia. Somewhere, I'm probably layman in terms of both OSCOR and this group drafts, but in terms of object security and then the group communication at a device level, probably doesn't seem to be. One is on the object security level, whereas this is a.
This happens entirely before, of course, the communication between the joining node and the resource directory is to be secure just as described in the resource directory document. Then what happens later on in the group is out of scope for this document.
Okay. So in terms of that still happens. And then the other question I had was like right now I'm looking at RD and lightweight M2M server as an equivalence, like we were discussing. So in terms of this group server or group manager, can it also be an RD? So then it kind of gels well with the management.
We haven't considered that, at least from my experience, they are treated separately, at least from a logical point of view. I wouldn't exclude that.
Maybe just to clarify, maybe it's not so connected with lightweight M2M server right now, this particular draft.
Matthias Kovac, Siemens. So I was under the impression that RD became more modular so that you can provide extensions that provide, for instance, new forms of lookups. You are using explicitly the existing resource lookup to then point to the resource to get the information. I just wanted to confirm this kind of dynamic that we had discussing about RD, making a bit modular, kind of plugging in more mechanisms that use the existing resource discovery mechanism by having the right target attributes. And group could be one of those extensions that you basically plug into your resource directory. Does that hold, or?
It's not used in this version. We are ready for a possible update in the end towards this direction. Depends on what happens in the RD document.
Okay.
So basically, yes, the resource directory is meant to be modular, but isn't it great when the base functionality actually already works for us? I mean, not having to extend it, it's a good thing.
So from Jabber, Christian says at Matthias, can we have the group's discussion on RD after my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so who has read this document or a version of this document. Peter is, yeah, okay, co-authors, I hope, maybe that's misplaced hope, but generally should have read the document. But anybody else? So I take this as the place where you have been alerted that there is an interesting document out there, and I think this is great work, and I would love to get some reviews of this. Okay. Did you want to talk about the other two security documents, the Echo request tag and the actuators document as well? No?
I prefer not. I'm not co-author and don't know them so well.
So is there anybody here who wanted to do that because I don't have slides from anyone? So did anybody want to discuss Echo request tag and actuators? Okay, Jim wants to.
I just are we? There was we're about ready to working group last call Echo. Is that going to happen now?
That's a good question. So who has read version 03 of the Echo request tag document? Jim has. So we will get to one response to the working last call. Oh, Jim has read it too. Yeah. So I think we can issue a working blast call because the document is fundamentally ready. But we have to make sure that we actually get useful replies from that. So let me just ask, if we issue a working blast call now, who will send in comments? Jim, Jaime, Francesca. There's one hand. Alex, thank you. Okay. Good. So I think we should do that next. Now, on the actuators document, I think we have had a little bit of a different perception of what this is. Is this an admonition to implementers, which would make it like an AWIG document? Is it some text we may at one point add to RFC 7252 to clarify that you have to be a bit careful how you use these primitives? I'm not entirely sure what the correct disposition of this is. Of course, we could just publish it as another informational RFC, but that may not be the best place to make sure that the people actually read this document. So I'm a bit unsure what to do with it. I mean, it's very useful information, but what should we do with it? Okay, the answer is people are leaving the room. Okay, maybe we also need to take that to the list. I shuffled around the agenda a little bit, but maybe we actually should unshuffle this because we just ran into the resource directory issue, and maybe we can relatively quickly go through that. So I think the idea would be to do the resource directory part now and then go to the next parts. Resource directory. So Christian, are you out there somewhere? Can you press the red button? Why doesn't that work? Oh, it's okay. Christian, you should have the mic now.
Hello, working group.
Hello, you're nice and loud.
I'd like to talk about the resource directory and especially its status since the last ITF meeting. So there are two big things that have come up here. Next slide, please. One thing is that we finally received a review on the topic of the modernized link format, thanks to Klaus, which indicates that we should, to quote, would probably not want to do that. The other is the topic of groups, which has already been introduced in the questions to Marco. But before we get to those, I'd like to give a short update of what has happened. Slide, please. So there's the security policies have been updated, responding to some comments that we got. There was a successful plug test, although there are still issues with the universal deployment of IPv6, so we couldn't test all the working clients against each other. But what we could test did largely work, but resulted in some good comments, which are either under processing or have been incorporated as editorial changes. Now, all those changes wound up in a -16 version. You might have noticed that there's also a -17 version, which includes the later changes to the group. But as I see, the slides are the other way around. So slide, please. Let's start with the topic of modernized link format. What we tried to do with modernized link format was to work around the limitations of 6690 by doing what you could describe as a 6690 bis in an appendix. Now that didn't go too well with the reviews. So we are moving back a little now to saying that there is a limited subset of 6690 links, which should work with what people have implemented, and prescribe that only for those data sets the resource directory can work with link format. Now, as for the implementations, I've gone through almost a dozen implementations of CoAP or link format, and none of them do the bad things we are trying to work around from 6690. So it seemed to be fair to do a BIS, but the sentiment seems to be that 6690 is not fully the way to continue anyway, given what we'll hear in the next presentation on links.json. So defining a limited subset with which everyone can work seems to be the good way forward here. That does preclude some particular applications, especially the one that Matthias asked for in the London meeting, which is about endpoints that have a path prefix. Now, those can't work with that kind of links, but those applications can still either use Coral or any other link format that's not inheriting the 6690 problems, or rely on the implementation to work with those links that are outside of what the resource directory specification actually says is okay. Now, the other topic, slide please, is groups. Now, groups have been in the resource directory. Do you still hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Groups have been in the resource directory for about 5 years, and what came up in the discussion also with Marco and trying to work on a concrete application of groups is that what those groups do is not actually what you need to deploy a group, because back then it seems to me the impression was that a resource directory could just publish a list of endpoints and to be part of a group, and they would automatically join. Now, joining is a bit more complicated now that we expect everything to run over crypto. So there is not much value anymore in enumerating the membership. And also that part of resource directory added quite a bit to its complexity. So it was maybe 10% of the whole document length. So what I'm trying to do with this group proposal is to say that groups are not a thing as a separate entity in resource directory, basically ripping out those 10%, but introducing a way of registering a group as an endpoint. Now, this is something that doesn't need any complexity on the implementation side, because it's just an endpoint, just with a particular attribute, which it already had. Next slide, please. This also means that we can now look up groups, look up resources of groups, which is something Marco hinted to in the group application for OSCORE as well. Yeah, and as it would always have been, a group is registered by a commissioning tool that knows all the details of the groups. Now that would in practice often be the, next slide please. That would in practice always often be the group manager that knows what the details of that group are. So in the -17 draft, the old groups got replaced with basically an appendix that says this is a way how you can use groups. This is a usage pattern for which we also define an endpoint type. So it is well defined, but it's rather simple, straightforward, and hopefully something the working group will not object to this late in the process, given that we are already trying to move towards a working group last call. Now, one reason why this was done is that implementers usually didn't implement. There was exactly one implementation by Jim that implemented those groups as they were, and this means that we can't really present much interoperability experience with those groups, whereas the new groups are something you can do with any resource directory. Next slide, please. So as to the point of how can resource directory progress now, there are two concrete questions I'd like to ask. One is, does anyone use all the details of RFC 6690, in particular the origin resolution rules? Because if so, we might need to prescribe that an RD even process those correctly, which I think we don't need to, making implementations way simpler. And the other question is, are there any applications we did not hear before of the groups that were in the personal -5 draft up until -16? If the answers to both questions are no, I think we can possibly by the next interim meeting publish a draft version that can go into working group last call. But of course, I'd like to hear the working group opinions on all of those topics.
So Zach Shelby from ARM. Thanks, Christian. Really good presentation, and good work to reduce the size of a draft going into working group last call. That doesn't happen often. Just my insight onto both of these. I mean, the reason we added groups as they were back then was because of Peter. You know, in the lighting industry, this was seen as a necessary tool for installation management tooling. And so it was really just based on a very clear industry request. Now, this is a neat way of solving the same problem with less mechanics. You know, nobody ended up implementing that group thing because a lot of RDs that are deployed today on the internet are centralized cloud thingies. They're not available locally for this type of group communications. So I haven't seen a lot of RD deployments at the edge. That could change, and that's fine, because I think this new mechanism is okay. On the first question, I'm not aware of people doing advanced 6690 work. I haven't seen that in the wild. So I think it's safe to say we could simplify it and dumb it down for this, and then let's see in the future what happens with Coral. One thing I do think we have to be aware of is future compatibility with new link formats in this. Just double check that we don't get caught with Coral coming and then not being able to use it.
Thank you. I think we can take care of the Coral compatibility.
Matthias Kovac, Siemens. So I try to catch up kind of the exact issues with RFC 6690, and I couldn't find actually explicit text that redefines the URI resolution mechanism, or that you should do it in a different way. I think there was just explanation missing that people who are not aware of the actual algorithm do it right. So I'm not sure kind of what happened. I tried to figure it out from the mailing list, but I'm a bit lost there. Is there really a feature that people wanted to use? I think it's more a bug where text is missing.
Well, it's not particularly about the URI resolution itself. So 3986 stands. But 6690 says that, for example, before you resolve the href links, you have to first resolve the anchor and then resolve the references in the href relative to what that anchor resolved to. And in between, sometimes in between, you have to form the origin of that. So you strip all the path components. That's something that technically is not part of the URI resolution, but part of the resolution that happens before the URIs are resolved.
Yeah, so in particular, I think it's only broken if you use relative URIs upon registration, but I never saw that anyone does the relative unless there's a bug in the application or whoever does it.
Well, it turns out it appears as a bug when you have a relative reference and there's an absolute anchor. And that's one of the two issues. And the other issue is with applications that, well, when you register the resource directory, you should register relative references, because otherwise you can't use the upcoming protocol negotiation topics. But if you want to have a path as your base, for example, in the applications you presented, where you would have a gateway that registers parts of what it is forwarding as individual endpoints, then that pre-resolution step of stripping the base URI down to its origin would bite you.
Okay, I think now I understood this kind of very indirect way where it breaks together. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can just add that one of the original ideas was that you can put your link format text into ROM by using relative references. And well, that's for use in well-known core, but we have this simple registration mechanism where the resource directory then fetches the well-known core and constructs a registration out of that. So that's why relative references sometimes do occur, and we should make sure that we can say where they work and where they don't.
Peter van der Stok. To go back to the former topic, I have had feedback from the lighting community, and they have no objections to this new type of using the groups. Okay, fine.
Thank you.
So probably is this working at all? Probably the next step is to ask exactly these questions on the mailing list once more, and wait for a week and then issue the working class call.
Will do.
Good. So thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
And then we have RDD and SSD. Could have used this one all the time.
Thank you. Okay, this is a very small update on the RDD and SSD draft. What we have done is added a section in the beginning of the RDD and SSD draft, which motivates actually the mapping which goes on from the resources to the services. So one of the things that one has to find is the DNS domain in which the resource holding, how's this called? Host, which domain it is, and there is a new draft which has been done. That tells you how you can actually find the domain of your node at which the software is running. So that is then solved. the service type, we have discussed that actually the resource type and the service type actually serve the same functionality because there are services delivered and you want to service of a typical functionality you want to discover. And that is what you want to do both with the resource type and the service type, where the service type actually may envelope several resources with different resource types, which can be then put together in one type of resource type. So that motivates that. And then further, the instance can be a manufacturer generated name. So like I have my Hewlett-Packard a printer, and I may have Hewlett-Packard 1 and 2 or 3 within my local domain, and so you can do it like that. Or you can be more general. You say, look here, let's be very absolutely certain that we have no misunderstandings, and prefix use the UUID, which is supposed to be rather identify the instance of the service. Or what you can do, that you have an interface description and you describe in it how you actually find the attribute for the instance. Or you can, during deployment, find using commissioning tool, which tells you, look here, you're number 555 in the left-hand corner. So these are the different examples that we put in the instance, and together with the domain service type and the instance, the service type for used in the DNS is completely defined. So that is what we, what we have done up to now. If there are any comments on this approach, please let me know. It makes the thing more flexible, and it gives an explanation how you can actually adapt it to your own circumstances. Yep. There is one suggestion that everyone may have in the YANA registry, which automatically maps the service type to the resource type. I don't know if this is a good idea. I should like to have some reactions about that if people think it is good, but or that we just keep the service type registry and the resource type registry, and we do not care about a fixed mapping.
Ted Lemon. So the mapping problem is actually a really big problem, and having a registry would be nice. I'm not sure that having a registry of mappings is the first step. The first step, I would think, would be having a registry of names that you might map.
But there is a service type registry.
No, I don't mean. Are you talking about the DNSSD service type registry? Yeah, no. What I mean is that the things that can appear in Core RD are not enumerated, and therefore defining a mapping between them and DNSSD service types is problematic. And this is a problem that exists because there are about 15 different standards bodies defining their own different ways of doing these things. And this is something the IAB actually did a report on recently. We kind of need to solve that problem if we're going to do this. And I don't know how to solve that problem. So that's
there is a resource type registry that has about 200 something entries.
Where are you talking about a Core RD resource type?
Yes.
Okay, and that's being are people like and those guys?
Not yet. Most of the entries are from OCF, and I think a few from Broadband Forum.
Okay. So there's a start. Do you get the sense that the other SDOs that are working on this are interested in participating in that, or is this just OCF and BBF?
Well, it's a registry, so it's not really hard to participate.
Yes, but the problem is right now it sort of feels like there's a tendency to try to keep this stuff proprietary or within the SDO, so that only members can use it, and that creates an interop problem for us.
Dave has some experience with this process.
Dave Theater. I can only answer half of one of your questions. OCF has a policy to register all their resource types with IANA. Right? There's no intent to keep any of them private. In fact, it's part of their requirement before they publish a standard is they make sure everything's in IANA before they publish their document as the final copy. Now, you'd ask about other organizations. I can't comment on them. And so the OCF wants everything to be in the IANA resource type registry. What I can't comment on is whether OCF cares about the service type mapping. I have no idea. And mapping a service type to a resource type is actually the easier direction. The opposite direction is much harder because resource types can be arbitrary URLs, not just the things that are in the registry. Mapping the things that are in the registry is very straightforward, but mapping arbitrary resource types, and so maybe in the proxy you say, or the map or whatever, you say, I choose to not register any of the, and not make those be discoverable in DNS. That's why that one's a much harder problem. So anyway, I think I answered half of one of your questions. So.
Another solution is that actually we define a parameter which is called STIS, so that for each node it is defined what his service type is. And so we have no mapping, nothing else. It is the one who installs the node who actually knows what, or the manufacturer who knows what the service type should be.
I think we come up with this interesting problem that we have 2, 3, 4 registries defining essentially, but not entirely, the same thing. We don't have a good process in the IETF to merge registries. So maybe there is a more fundamental problem lurking there. Dave.
So one other point to add, this is Dave Taylor again. Ted, if you're not familiar with the resource type registry, the syntax in resource type registries allows things like dots, which makes it complicated to map it into service types, not the other way around. So that's just another example of, if you look at all the ones, you know, the 200 whatever that are registered, the vast majority of them have a bunch of dots in them.
Don't move. Solicit comments. So I've had some comments. Sorry, I have had some comments. Thank you very much. I really looking forward to some more comments and push this forward. Okay, thank you very much.
Don't go away. Don't go away. So this finishes the resource directory segment. I think we. No, I try this one. Yeah, but you will need yours in a second. So I think we can skip forward to the CallConf item on the agenda at this point. Peter is the next one on the agenda. So
thank you.
Go ahead. Skip some more.
Oh yes, this is me. Yeah. Okay. I've run into a problem with registration of SIDs. To your reminder, we have the contents of a Young specification can be transported over constrained networks. We have then the Young to CBOR draft, which tells you how this Young is converted into CBOR, which makes it smaller. However, the Young names can be very long, so you're still left with a very, very large payload. So what has been done is that the Young names can be reduced to numeric identifier called a SID. For example, in our case, where Young is usually used to define observables in a node so that you can read how the node is doing. What we have done, for example, is specified the voucher, which is transported over the network, specified it in Young, and so the CBOR plus the identifier, the SIDs, are transported over that. Now, one of the things that we want is once you have defined an RFC, that the SIDs you have that have been allocated to the Youngs, which are part of the Young module, which is part of the RFC, should not change. And that's what we want. We don't want to change it. At this moment, the SID ranges, there are SID ranges allocated to modules from a common space facility. And they can be changed during the development if you need be. If you don't want to change them, you don't change them, but suppose you change your whole draft or another draft, etc. So you can change them, so you have all this freedom. Once the RFC, the ID is ready to go to RFC, you go to the YANA, you get an RFC range, which can be fragmented in short ranges, which are supposed not to change anymore, which are allocated to the modules in the RFCs. Fine. Now, what we have now that it's not clear how within this within the RFC the SIDs should be registered and administrated. So this is what we propose, that once you have a SID range for every module in the RFC, that the contents of the SID files, which are which actually specify this is the young name and this is the SID file, that is part of the RFC. Just like the same as you have now that the whole young specification is part of the RFC, and also how, for example, the tree which you have, which is constructed, is part of the RFC. So we want to include that as well. What we also then want that apart from that, the module normally is registered by IANA, which tells you what is in it. That also the SID range is administered by IANA. So that we can also then find that for every module which is in the RFC, we find the name to SID's map, which is part and which will not be changed and is actually on the responsibility of IANA. You want to say something?
Yes, do you want some answers or some questions right now or at the end of the presentation?
If you can wait a second, I will be happy. Thanks. So what we then will ask for IANA is to provide an extension to the young parameter registry. In this young parameter registry, we already find a module sub-registry. And so the suggestion is to create an additional SID module sub-registry in which is mentioned the SID file in which you can find then all the administrated young names and the SIDs which converge with that, so that I will feel reasonably happy that this will remain constant and over the years can be used and reused.
Okay, so Alexander on the mic. Thanks very much for your email and for this presentation, Peter. So this is completely in line with what the company space and the whole thing, the whole system that it was supposed to work. Right, once you assign, and I think Karsten pitched in on the mailing list, once you assign a SID, then it never changes. And of course, we talked to IANA a couple of times, and this is really something in the way things should be working. So I really like what you said here, because we really need to specify, like in some places, if the process is not specific enough, then we need to go and make sure that it is actually written in a way that works for people that are actually using it. So that does seem to me to be like, yes, this is in the way, at least in how I felt it, it goes exactly in that direction. And it just in like, okay, well, there is maybe something that was not explicit. Let's make it explicit. Yeah. Yeah.
Because we have looked at what was written down and we didn't exactly know. So that's, our brains came up with this. Okay, thanks.
Stay near the microphone. So, of course, we are, the German phrase would be Rechnung ohne den Wert machen. We are trying to compute the bill without the whatever. So, of course, IANA has to be happy with doing this. I mean, given that there will be hundreds of modules with hundreds of names in it, so essentially this registry will in the end have 10,000, 100,000 of entries. So we have to make sure that IANA can actually handle that. And as far as I understand, you have discussed this with Michelle to some extent?
Yes, so we've been discussing with Michelle, and she was basically also always saying, well, you know, just get the last call. We're pretty happy with most of the things that are there, and we just want some more feedback. But they're pretty happy with the things are as they are right now. So now, when you say, okay, we need to specify a little bit more this process, maybe there will be a couple of questions popping up from coming back from Michelle to say, okay, how do we exactly do that? Because she's really very constructive, and she really wants to make sure that things make sense to her. So
I can see it. You have a module in RFC, and there's no SID file allocated. What do I do all of a sudden?
Yeah, but it's. I mean, for me, this is very, very reasonable. That can be worked out. But if you are able to contribute some text to that, actually to actually specifying the way this behavior works. And you know, make sure that we actually go, I mean, also you, and together we go to Michelle and make sure that your text actually corresponds to something that she considers not a horrible nightmare, but a beautiful thing. Then, of course, that sounds
okay.
Really good.
Good. So the procedure will be to actually get this into the document and then get agreement from Michel that this actually can be done, and get the agreement from the other Michel that Komai.space actually does this, and great, wonderful.
Great, fantastic.
Okay, now that's my slide.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. So this was one of the very, very few issues that we have been discussing about these drafts that have been sitting there for quite a while. The other one was whether a Yang-Siba document should have a context dependence, and I think in Montreal we decided it should not have a context dependence, and we now have updated drafts that reflect that. And the next thing we need to do is to finish this. Now it turns out all the current authors of these documents have a lot of things to do, and so this makes it a little bit hard to actually do the finishing here. And I have a proposal that I hope nobody objects to, which is that we add an editor to the CoreConf documents whose job is to get them finished. And so I had this idea at the hackathon, and I looked around, and the one person that yeah, I was sitting pretty close to Ivailo at the time. So actually, Ivailo, if you hear him talking, sounds exactly like Michel. So he's like a really good stand-in for Michel Villette, but he also knows a lot about all this technology. So I think he's also the right person to do this. So I'm proposing that we add Ivailo to the documents as an editor, and yeah, give him a chance to finish this. So from a procedural point of view, the working group chairs can just do that. So I could just declare this, but of course I would like to hear what people think about that.
So as an author of this draft, I support this because I mean, we've been like the little epsilon, the little delta that is really having someone every day thinking about this, about getting this finished, and not having been on 2 continents and stuff like this. It's really helpful. So I think that's we need this type of person. And on a second perspective, having no Ivailo, I think that he's more than capable of getting the job done.
I'm not sure if Michel is the other Michel, the Michel in Canada, is listening, but somebody has to break this to him, and I think then we can go ahead. Good. So we have 15 minutes left to pull things forward from Thursday. So let's do that. And the next one on the Thursday agenda is the DevURN document. Is Yari here? Yes.
Okay, so this should be brief. Just as a reminder, this is of course the URN types for devices with various kinds of addresses, MAC addresses, and one-wire addresses, and so forth. I've been expanding that a little bit in recent times. Version 3 basically had no major changes. We had some reference updates, and we'd be going a little bit back and forth on the exact syntax. And as part of some of the incorporation of other identifier types into the dev URNs, we had added the percent encoding last time. After looking at that a little bit more, we were making a change there again. And dev URNs are likely to appear in CNML sensor name fields, which have been defined in 8428 as with a very limited character set in order to then be able to easily be lifted out and used in various query components. And basically this means that it's not necessarily a good idea to include person signs. So if we take that out, maybe that's okay. But otherwise, this is relatively stable, as at least as one considers the things that are in the draft today. One could, of course, expand that, and maybe that's the discussion to be had now. So just to draw a more explicit point on this, the draft actually takes over some things that were previously in the, or are currently still in the lightweight machine-to-machine specifications. There's the OS and OPS syntax for serial numbers. And they're not exactly in the same format in this draft that they were in the OMS spec. But I think it makes sense for the IETF to sort of try and generalize, like, okay, this seems like a useful thing. Let's make sure that's actually defined and fits with the rest of the structure syntax-wise. It doesn't use the person signs and all kinds of other things like that. So we're making a change. We're incorporating some things, and we have been trying to ask if there's people who would be impacted by that. We haven't found any, but I don't know if we reached everybody. So now would be a good time to shout if any of that causes heartburn for you. I should also mention that there are some other types in this these OMA specifications that we did not deal with, and there might be some opinions that we should deal with some of that. So there's a couple of things there. They refer to the NAI URN type that doesn't exist anywhere, and nobody's defined that. It felt a little bit like that's not our, or it's not a great fit for this draft, but it might be a very useful thing perhaps to do. And then there's some other things that maybe, at least on last time I looked at it, might need some slight adjustment there. There are some URN types that can be used for some of these things, like MAIDs and IME and so forth. But at least on my look, the syntax didn't seem to be exactly correct at the spec at the time that I looked at it. So I guess the question is, where do we stop? Like, do we stop here or do we add something? And I'm just editing this draft. It's up to you guys to say what should we do. So I'll leave it at that and open it up for comments.
Thank you, Jari. This is Matthias Siemens. So there's something I contacted you, I think 2 IETFs ago. So the context is I'm active in the W3C at this Web of Things working group. And the background is there are a lot of kind of companies who don't have this detailed background in internet and web technology, but they want to kind of move there. One thing I saw is that they wanted to have something like URNs and use them, but they didn't know that there is something in the beginning that basically defines how you can use them. So there was things like URN : company name, and then a common pattern was something like the Java package names to have like an easy way to construct something that is unique but kind of intuitive and so on. So what happened is that we now have a lot of drafts where we have these sloppy examples where we have like URN def WOT. I try to kind of converge this already to the patterns defined by your draft. But I saw kind of a need for this kind of easy way to make up a unique URNs.
And I think we have that easy way because we have this organization and serial number and so on based options here. So if you can, bother yourself by registering an enterprise number from IANA, which would be really easy, like basically an email or fill in a template, then you can stick that into the right branch here and then do whatever afterwards.
Yeah, and exactly this part, to be aware that there's an IANA registry where every company could get this number for free and so on. Just to my experience is already too much for many people who do their own model number, serial number kind of encoding of unique identifiers. So,
okay, so is this something that we should solve with more education and sort of preaching to people, or are we going to define the whatever URN type and then you can...
Yeah, so I don't have my own agenda on this, so I want to bring it up to basically get some more input how we should do this. So I've been going around to people who started using URNs, especially internally in the company, and point to this draft, like pick something that works correctly, use the UUID if you use UUIDs there, but don't, it's not a free format that you can choose. So there is definitely a need for education, but maybe a good solution would also be that there is one, like pick this one if you want to be free and then to have something very intuitive. That's just a proposal.
That might be something that would be sort of easy to write something higher up in the document. That's like, if you're just looking for this, go into this section and use this kind of style. Might be easy to point to.
Yeah, so this meta question is if there is some feedback on should we have something like the Java package name style where you can use your own domain name that basically is unique. That's why it was chosen there, and then construct something text-based that fits your needs. Or yeah, if you should have the stronger pushback and educate people here, do it that way, and then maybe improve the document as you suggested, that there's kind of a really 3 steps explanation how to get it.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on that. I mean, we currently have the enterprise number scheme. We could certainly have, or go. I think we actually had previously. Ari, do you remember we had previously a version that used the domain names? That's an option too, if that feels like more usable. But I wonder if the problem is that they're not ending up with this draft or RFC at all, and then it's kind of difficult for us to do anything. Or if the problem is that they don't know how to fill the IANA template.
Yeah, that I don't know. It seems like they don't know about the general process. So
yeah, maybe it helps to have examples in the document. So one quick comment I would like to make about enterprise numbers is that in some organizations, it's really difficult to get control over what you are supposed to do with an enterprise number. I mean, imagine Siemens, this is a big organization, and then somebody has this enterprise number, and are you really allowed to use this enterprise number in a specific context? That requires some work.
Yeah, so I have
Ericsson,
direct
we
feedback
take
on
many
that.
of multiple ones easily, and even bought a company with the number 5 and so on.
Okay, yeah, maybe multiple ones, but yeah, for instance, within Siemens, it would be really hard to know like who's actually the person responsible to register this, who is then allowed to use that, what is the process to have some subpath under that, because like there's the brand, then there are these different divisions, and kind of what I saw is that the divisions figured out how to do the domain registration, so the subdomains, that works, that's something that is established, the other thing is not, so.
Point taken. So maybe that does point us to the direction of adding something that would allow domain names there.
Hi, Padma Kumar from Nokia. We had an exchange earlier on the lightweight machine to machine. So basically on the NAI and EMEA, IME, IMSI, etc., these combinations are all used under the lightweight M2M TS under the assumption that these are device identifiers. So it's like a URN dev needs which are being brought in by different operators. So there is so it is used within the network and under the URN:dev with this kind of identifier like IME, IMSI.
So my understanding is that the spec refers to multiple URN types, like the dev URN is one of them, but there's also others like UUID and so on.
Yeah.
And then the only like there's no question about that, and that seems very sensible and so on. But then there's some that haven't been defined, which like need to either fall into this draft that we're discussing here or some other draft somewhere. And some that like might need some small editing in the spec because they're pointing to the string is wrong that you stick in front of the identifier, and because this been defined by 3GPP and other RFCs in the IETF previously, like this IMSI stuff and so on.
Yeah, I agree to that. I mean, some of this needs to be added, but in the context of this URN:dev, can we extend URN:dev with all these what are part of that network and it's a device identifier? So it could be like an NAI, or it could be anything what that network would like to use beyond that URN:dev. Then it becomes like a unique identifier within that network zone. Because like, for example, like IME or IMSI is brought in from the SIM card and it's used within the network, but it's a device identifier when it is an IoT network device.
Okay, but we already have some of those things already exist as different URN types. I'm not sure we want to sort of redefine that. That would seem a little maybe, I don't know what people here say, but
so one is in the context of network access, and the other now we are trying to define in the terms of it's a device URN. So it's an IoT context. So that's where somewhere it has a common part, but it's.
Again, I'm just editing this thing. You guys tell me what to do. My personal opinion is that we should probably not mix the fact that we are doing IoT with that sort of the identifiers. We have different types of identifiers, and we use them for different purposes. Sometimes it's an IoT device, sometimes it's something else. So let's just define all the ones, possibly in one or multiple URN types, but we shouldn't necessarily try and do everything under the dev URN. That seems personally overkill. But then there's like the question of the NAI, which you and I discussed, like what to do with that. Should we have somebody else drive a draft on that, or stick it in here, or forget it, or?
Yeah, okay. Probably we'll take it offline. But in terms of what is part of dev, identifier and URN, I think it all should come here. And if it doesn't fit, then it cannot be used. That should be the suggestion or recommendation from this final outcome.
I think we have already quite a few non-dev URN IDs that we are using for devices. So I don't see it necessarily a big problem, and redefining existing URN schemes under dev URN sounds a bit flaky. Probably would end up people using both, and they would have to do exactly. So maybe it's a bit of I said we have a discussion outside of scope of this draft. What is a proper identifier for a device in general? Are network identifiers proper identifiers? My hunch is why not? But maybe that's a bit bigger discussion. Maybe even Archie's area.
Matthias, so yeah, I think there might be an informal document about that explains what are URNs and how to use that. And I mean, it doesn't help that there's a dev in there and then this is to identify a device, because it's kind of at two different levels where you decide kind of what is using the identifiers, and then you only need unique ones, and it doesn't have to be in the identifier itself for what you are using it.
I think that would make a great research group document, identifiers and identities in the IoT. I mean, you could derive 10 PhDs about that.
Mm-hmm.
I would actually give some credit for the lightweight M2M document on that regard. I mean, they actually tried to identify that these are the things that we need in the industry. And I mean, the only problem with that is that, okay, it shouldn't point to things that don't exist. If they don't exist, we should either get rid of them or define them.
So we have 3 minutes left, which is great because I promised somebody that he would have time on the agenda today. Abhijan, are you still there? So we have been discussing interesting things you might be using CoAP for. And there are a lot of people out there in the operational area that want to use CoAP for telemetry, for network management information. So that's interesting. And here we have another interesting thing, using CoAP for streaming. So you have 3 minutes. You probably can extend beyond the end of the meeting. It's just that people will start leaving. And you have a microphone there.
Hello, everyone. So let me just briefly go through the use case. Yeah, so we were working on a real business problem. The problem was that in many cases, people want to stream the live first-person view over internet, over IP, to do certain intelligence for operations in warehouse, or for some monitoring, or for defining the path that a dumb robotic terminal should take remotely. So that is called visual SLAM. So visual simultaneous localization and mapping. So now the thing is that the experience is the existing technologies that are used for streaming
causes certain kind of, video freezes, and lots of problems happen because of non-real-timeness and non-guarantee in delivery and all these things. So when this problem came to us, we kind of looked back into QAP, and what we realized is that probably we can look at QAP from this angle also. So one side, we have HTTP on TCP, and that is the de facto standard right now for streaming over the public internet, right? Some or other variation using adaptive bitrate on top of that. But the core thing is HTTP handshakes, right? So we have RESTfulness, standardized APIs, we have reliability in there, we have wide adaptation, we have congestion avoidance. On the other side, if you look at the initial days since the beginning of this millennia, so we had this RTP on UDP, which guarantees real-timeness, but reliability is missing. Now, if we combine these two, we see that QAP is RESTful. QAP has both the options, so you can change between optionally between reliability, reliable delivery, and best effort delivery. And because no response actually gives you the open loop delivery, so we can marry the best of these two worlds using QAP intelligently. So the idea is that can we have something that is equally good in sending small sensor data as well as streaming video or time series streaming? Can we have something like a counterpart of HTTP? So HTTP is, while it is giving you web services, normal web services, at the same time, it is not treating video as a special type of data, and it is streaming video with the same infrastructure. So can we have something for this scenario? Because in many cases, the dump terminals which are moving around across warehouses or in different fields, or for some remote maintenance, they are also sending some small tiny sensor data as well as they're sending the first person view, so that the person sitting at the control room can do something. So I'll not go through much detail because to honor the time, so we made certain extensions. I'll directly go to the results and experiments. You please go through the draft if you are interested. These are few headed extensions that we have kind of borrowed because we want to relate the segment. So it is following the same methodology as the progressive download or for what we had for HTTP streaming. The basic technology, that is the same thing we are using. So chunk, and what we are doing here is that based on the criticality of the current chunk, what is the criticality of the segment that is being delivered? Does it transfer certain important metadata, or there may be several other criteria, and that depends on the context. We are deciding whether to go for best effort delivery or whether to go for reliable delivery. So that way we can maintain a balance between your reliable delivery and real-timeness, right? And the other thing is that if your receiving end does have enough computing capacity, so you have 100% reliable the metadata and critical information, and based on the loss probability of the channel, you have certain part of the critical non-critical information. Combining these two, you can actually predict the whole frame. So that technology is available, and many people who are working on image processing and video processing are actually using that. And also, if you are not able to send the critical information, drop the whole frame. So that way you are implicitly congestion, you are avoiding the congestion implicitly. We did certain, these are the handshakes, you will find them in, okay, so this was our setup. So one thing we did is for open internet for different loss probabilities. So we had Raspberry Pis where we installed the program. So one had HTTP streaming, one had Aerialist, and this guy was sitting at this end. He's working with me, and we're streaming this over an emulated network setup, and we're trying to get the data on 3 different interfaces here over Wireshark. And there was another thing was we tried to create a realistic loss model. So there is an UAV moving around a a warehouse, and there is a obstruction, radio obstruction, which is creating some shadowed area. And and probably for 3 seconds, it takes to cover this area for 2 or 3 seconds, and we're getting a zero radio zone over there. So just to come with this, so this is what we're getting is very excellent result using by streaming in on QAP. So one thing to and we compared with RTP as well. I have not produced the result. RTP is not giving us good PSNR because of the reason that if the metadata gets lost, you have no mechanism to retrieve it. But in case of QAP, you have some chances of retrieving the meta. So we are getting better sanity in terms of reception of frames and in terms of reception of or in terms of reproducing the frames at the receiving end. And this is also another experiment that we did with real APs, the mobile APs that we have in India. So, so this is the topology, and this guy is holding the AP. It is close to the Raspberry Pis, and now this guy is moving out. So as he is moving across the region, what we have is a drop in the RSSI, receive signal strength. And what we see is that when it is in this region, there the HTTP stream or the standard streaming mechanism, it kind of freezes at that point of time. And then when this guy starts to move back to the same place, and we were actually holding a stopwatch. I was holding the stopwatch, and and we were recording the time. What is the time that is being streamed from the video producer to video consumer? So when this guy comes back, and so now the signal has actually gone back to this level. What I see is that in case of what we did over QAP, we see that the consumer is showing just the exact time what we are showing. So there was momentary loss because the signal just dropped down. So there is a zero radio kind of thing, but it quickly recovered back, right? Whereas here we see a complete 6-second lag within this period of time. And if I have more loss instances over there, these 6 seconds will get increased. If I use RTP, then what will happen is I lose more of the frames. In this case, we just work with JPEG streaming. One of the reasons for, or motion JPEG, one of the reasons for using motion JPEG is that we wanted to avoid the complexity of time compression in this case. And the other thing is that in many cases, to take the decision logic uses the information in the frame. So they have to reconstruct the frame and do the image processing to extract the information. So if I'm transmit the motion JPEG, maybe I'm not at that high frame rate. Maybe I'm, in this case, we send, I think 5 or 6 frames per second. But that was when we spoke to the engineering team who are working on drone, they said that it is quite good for them to, do a survey or do a scanning or things like that. So I request you to please go through the draft, and if you have any comments. And what I think is that this kind of work will go well with the too many responses and some of the streaming or time series related contributions that are going on in T2TRG as well as in this working group. And that's it from my side. Thank you. T is waiting.
Yeah, thank you, Arjan. So I think it's really interesting. There are ways QAP can be used that I wouldn't have dreamed of. And I think we probably have the research group where we can look at some of these aspects as well. I think we should find how these customers from management, from this is not exactly video, it's a slightly different kind of video, but how they actually fit into our ecosystem. And we had the DOTS people here the last time. And I think this is all very interesting and very promising. And I would ask you to have a look at the document that is out in the Internet Drafts Directory and look there for more details. So with this, I think we're at the end of the meeting, and see you all on Thursday.
Thank you all.